My name is Doug Wadsworth, and I'm here with my father, Ray Wadsworth. We're going to talk in a minute about the history and evolution of the Alaskan salmon seiner. But first, for a little bio, Dad, can you go ahead and just tell when you were born and where you were born?
Well, I was born in Seldovia, and
What year?
In 1946. And my dad was kind of a storekeeper in Seldovia a little bit, and then somehow, since the major industry was commercial fishing, he got involved in commercial fishing and actually bought a boat called the Sea Scout.
Okay, so before you start, so here's a picture of the Sea Scout I pulled up. So this is the boat. So tell about when you first started fishing on this boat. How old were you? About what year was it?
Well, I was, let's see, it had been around 1950. I was 4 years old.
Okay, and that's when you started fishing on this boat. Well,
that's correct. Well, that's when I started with my mom and dad. It was just a family operation out of Seldovia, and we seined for Washington Fish and Oyster Company over in Kodiak, on the north end of Kodiak, and Chuyak Straits at a cannery called Port Williams, which was owned by Washington Fish and Oyster Company.
Okay.
But in those days, there were fish traps in all the rivers, in all the main rivers, the Kenai River and up and down the Cook Inlet, and the fish traps did the majority caught the majority of the fish.
And you said the fish traps were actually owned by the seafood processing companies?
Well, they were like the fisherman, the processor, and the marketer, and they so it was that complete business that fishing from catching to marketing,
okay,
making canned salmon. It was all owned by big companies, the Brindles and other big companies whose names have escaped me now.
Okay, so Dad, you said all these, pretty much all the creeks had fish traps in front of them.
Yeah, so there were very few successful small-time fishing operations, and there were a number of reasons for that. Technology hadn't evolved very far. None of the boats had hydraulics. We had nets that were made out of cotton. We had the cork line was made out of real genuine corks, and without hydraulics in the boat, the only real power on the boat was manpower. And so some of the bigger seiners that were involved in Southeast Alaska, when they would have a 10, 12-man crew, and they looked for the biggest, strongest possible men they could find. But from little villages like Seldovia, it was just mom and pop operations, like our operation.
Okay.
All right, so we still got the picture of the Sea Scout up here. So the Sea Scout was actually too big to be a seiner in those days. So we towed jitneys around, and the jitneys were
It was like a smaller boat.
big skiff. It was just
Big
a big skiff, basically. It didn't have outboards in those days, so the jitneys would have a little inboard, like a 4-cylinder Gray Marine, a Jeep engine out of a World War II Jeep, basically, and then and a propeller and rudder and whatnot. And it had to be really shallow draft. It had to be a jitney because without having any hydraulic power or without having any real power at all, it was all manpower. And when you got mom, dad, and a 4-year-old, I was the plunger, and the plunger pole seemed like it was about as big around as a telephone pole because I was only 4 years old. I still remember it though, because my dad's hollering at me about plunge harder, plunge. And it's like, I can barely get this thing in and out of the water. So anyway, we pulled nets by hand. And because there was no such thing as hook holding, because it took almost an all-day job to make a set. So most of the time, I'm a little ashamed to say, but we would fish in the mouths of creeks. And our justification, I still remember my dad saying, the justification for fishing in a creek, which was behind the markers, fish and game markers, the justification was that, well, the fish traps were in the mouths of all the rivers, and they were. But the fish traps were sort of the political thing that was in those days. So we figured, well, heck, if the fish traps can do it, we can do it. And there were seasons that were so bad, so poor, that we got to the end of the season, we realized we'd got 1,500 huppies. We got paid by the fish. One year for Washington Fish, we got 1,500 huppies. Turned out we were high boat for the whole company. So there were bad seasons, and one of the reasons was I think most of the fish were caught by fish traps.
So go ahead.
Family operations were not a very real priority. Because processing companies made their money not off of us few families that fished, but off of Anyway, so we started out as a jitney, fishing a little bitty jitney boat. The Sea Scout was 38 feet, 36. It was 36 feet long, and it was just okay. So the power that finally came to be that enabled seining to be done on a bigger boat was the first big innovation was the power block. And the first I'm saying a power block, but nobody, unless you know what I'm talking about.
We'll figure they out.
It's like a great big pulley with a rubber thing inside, and the net goes through it, and it has power, so it pulls the net in for you.
So those were invented when you were a kid?
They were invented when I was a kid by a fellow by the name of Marco. He had the patents on it, and when my dad saw one,
the first one he saw, right?
The first one he saw, he went, "I gotta have one of those."
When was that?
So he bought one. That had to be 1951, maybe, something like that.
How did they work?
So, well, originally they didn't have, we didn't have hydraulics. Nobody had hydraulics. So there was a fair lead pulley up at the power block, two of them actually, and a continuous rope, because you do a line splice in it, where it was like a continuous, you couldn't even see where the splice was. This rope would go from around the winch, and the winch was driven mechanically off of V-belts, usually off the main engine, and through shafts. And we used old rear ends from cars and trucks and stood them on the end and made a pulley out of it. Anyway, put a capstan on it. But anyway, a rope would go up through the power block and then back down around the winch a couple times and back up through the power block. So it was a continuously run. When the winch would run, the power block would run. And then right after that, they came up with a hydraulic system. And
like within a couple of years or something?
Oh yeah, maybe even closer. It was really quick on the tails of that. I had one of those power blocks for quite a while. In fact, I saw it here a few years ago. It was on that jitney up in Northern Sound. Another subject though. But anyway, so then we get the hydraulics, and that began to change the way this fishing was done.
So what did it really change?
Well, it changed manpower. Now you didn't have to have, what it did change is now you didn't have to fish in a creek to make sets in a foot and a half of water, 5 miles behind the marker. Now you had a way of pulling the net in, so you could have a small crew like mom, dad, and the kids, and you could fish out in legal water and fish in deep water, which was the beginning of an evolution of moving from jitney fishing or fish traps, which were outlawed in 1963, something like that, when statehood, or whatever your statehood was. So that was when they outlawed the fish traps. So then the platform of the political thing.
Okay, transitioning here, video clip to video clip. So the power blocks changed fishing. They're hydraulic. Now you're able to go out in Cape Hall. You can pull your net in quickly. You don't need a huge manpower to do it. So now there's power blocks. So now I got a picture up of your dad's boat, the Mormon. So talk about now how this is different now, or about this boat, and about what time period it was. Because you said 1958 it became a state.
Yeah, I said 63, but I meant 58.
Yeah.
Well, the difference between the two boats is the Sea Scout was a traditional, at the time when I was a kid, that was a traditional kind of a boat. It had a trunk cabin. That's the cabin up front. And then it had a little cabin at the back of the trunk cabin, which was where you drove the boat from. That was where the main window was that you looked out, and that's where you drove the boat. But now that you're going to use this big boat for seining, you're stuck in that cabin, and seining required you to be out where you could see jumpers and maybe even look down in the water and see just where you're going to hit a rock. So then this picture this is Dave LeClaire built this commercial marine in Seattle, in Ballard, right here is where this picture was taken. This brand spanking new boat, and I was about 15 years old, so whatever year that was in.
While you're on that, so you mentioned LeClaire built the first boat that had a flying bridge like that.
Well,
is that right?
As far as I know.
Okay.
As far as I know, this we went from the trunk cabin to now. Now you see on this boat, you see a flying bridge and a steering station that's up on the top.
This is about 1960.
But to get there, we started out with building a little pipe frame on the top of the old Sea Scout, on the top of that little cabin. And then the pipe frame some guy came along and says, "Hey, if I stretch a tarp around this pipe, I'll be able to be out of the wind." And then some other guy, and I still remember the first one I saw, put a piece of plywood up, slightly angled forward in the very center, and found out that the wind would go up over the plywood and go over your head when you're sitting on the bench.
So you can stick your head around the top and stuff.
Yeah,
like
it was a great windbreak, and so then suddenly this pipe frame with a tarp stretched around it became made out of solid plywood. And it was like, what a novel idea that is. And they built it all, and they sloped at the back, made it look kind of good. And that's what you're looking at right here.
And this is Leclerc, was the first guy you knew.
You're looking at the trunk cabin, which now has a flying bridge on top of it instead of a little. My dad would have called it something else, an outhouse on the back. And then, but it wasn't really, but it looked like one.
Okay.
Anyway, so all right, so that was the evolution. So the pipes and the tarps turned into that.
Got it. Okay, we got a new picture up, and you were just talking about the flying bridge and Leclerc. They had the kind of the first ones you saw, and now we're going to the next evolution. So
I had seen this type of a pilot house on a sardine seiner in California, but the real thing was that we're fishing halibut in this picture. The salmon was so poor in 1973 that and this was the first year I just built this new boat. Just got out of 4 years in the Coast Guard and military service, so we're fishing halibut. But the point is, I used to fish halibut with my dad. Growing up between salmon, we'd fish halibut, and I'd sit up there on a bench in the flying bridge, with my left hand on the steering wheel and my looking over my right shoulder, watching a ground line come up as my dad would gaff halibut and when we caught him and flip him in the bins. So as I sat there and the rain poured down and I got wet and my butt would somehow find its way through your rain gear.
And you had a little flying bridge.
I had a flying bridge, but I'm standing out in the open.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, why couldn't I just put a roof over my head? So by golly, I went to work and I built this little pilot house that sits in the middle of the flying bridge with windows, and you can still walk around in front and you could still drive the boat from outside if you wanted to. But if you wanted to, you could be inside out of the weather, and it was great for running the boat for fishing halibut. So then began an evolution of change in seiners.
So this is one of the first ones that you built. They had the little wheelhouse on it.
As far as I know, this is the first Alaska seiner that ever had a wheelhouse inside the flying bridge.
Okay, but what about the funny little roofs they made for a while?
Well, so a lot of guys looked at that and went, "Oh, that's too confining. I'd rather stand out in the open, but I don't want that rain to come down on me." So they built a little roof over the top of the flying bridge, and they called it a sissy lid, which was you wimp, you're gonna have to get in and out of the weather, like standing up in the rain and getting
Can't handle it.
So anyway, that took off better than this took off, and I'm watching this design evolution because I'm always into boat building anyway.
Yeah.
I'm watching this happen, and I see guys put the sissy lid on, and then they realize that the wind's blowing them right in the face. So then they put this big plexiglass plate right in front of them so they could stand behind the plate. So then some guy comes along and thinks, gee, why don't I just enclose my sissy lid and I'll put walls all the way around it and put windows in it? And that became the first top house. So that was the next evolution. So we went from being inside to finally being on the roof in a pipe frame
with controls up there.
With controls to being maybe in a nice looking flying bridge. And this is how we ended up.
Okay, Dad, here we got a few pictures of your first boat that was in the last picture, the Leahone, and then a couple others you built. So can you tell us a little bit about these and the size and what they were like and how that was significant at the time?
Well, having grown up in fishing in shallow water, which was the most fun, I probably the kid in me still wants to do it. But it was really important to me to be able to get into shallow water in case fish were in shallow water, because there's some areas that were that was really important. Chignik Lagoon was one of them. So a lot of times we refer to these shallow seiners as Chignik seiners because of Chignik Lagoon. But anyway, so sitting in Prince William Sound one year, me and my friend that I grew up with, Dennis Calhoun, were in a big contest to try and design and bars of soap. We had these double bars of ivory soap, 2 bars, and you could break them apart. Anyway, it's just right for carving models. So we would sit. And when we were little kids, we would carve these out of cottonwood bark. But anyway, we sat in Prince William Sound one year, and we tried to figure out what would be the ideal seiner to come up with. And I came up with this bar soap with twin screws, twin propellers. And
it was a shallow draft. Which
and it was shallow draft. They were both in a tunnel, just like the single tunnel in Dave LeClaire's boats in commercial marine and a lot of the Bristol Bay boats. We had twin tunnels. And so that became, and these boats are all twin screw, and they became the first, as far as I know, there probably were other twin screw boats around,
yeah.
But these were the shallowest, and probably to this day, they're still probably the shallowest, drawing about 26 inches of water, throwing two 24-inch propellers. And
how long are these boats, and how was that significant back then?
Well, at the time, it seemed like the biggest seiner that I knew of in Kodiak and Chignik was 42 feet, and Delta built it. And then they built another one called their 38-footer, which my dad got the first one out of the mold actually on it. But so I built these at 47 feet, and that was like ridiculously big because we're still evolving in hydraulics, and it seems like you can't jump right into the fast lane. You sort of sneak up, working your ways from the left, and finally across to the fast lane on the right. Or I got that backwards. Unless you're in Australia, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, that's the history where we are at.
Okay. Okay. Here we've got another picture of the first Leona that you built, and I wanted to talk for just a minute about why they had a limit on seiner size. What the history of that was.
Well, and I wish I could double check on the date. I don't know when it happened, but there was quite a fleet of boats in California, sardine seiners, and the such that could have done a really good job in Alaska mopping up Alaska's resource. But most of the Alaska villages and Alaska residents, local people, didn't have the big evolved seiners that existed in the sardine fisheries, and they had total capability of being fantastic salmon seiners for big intercept fisheries like False Pass. And
these are big giant boats.
They're big. They're 70, 80 foot seiners that were primarily designed for sardines in California and.
So were they actually
south of Santa Cruz, California? Monterey area.
Were they taking over the fisheries?
Well,
the locals.
They could have. So the threat of all these boats coming up from down south and kind of corking everybody that was lived locally there in Alaska, was great. And some politician made a proposal anyway. So they set the limit at 58 feet. But heck, none of us even came close to having boats that were 58 feet. I mean, when I built this boat, it was a 47-footer. And a 58 was like, that's just way too big for anything we would want to do, and too deep a draft, et cetera, et cetera. So the 58-foot limit seemed like a goal that we were never going to reach. Nobody was ever going to build a boat 58 feet. What in the world would you do with a big boat like that? And then, and I know there were probably a few in Southeast, but I was Kodiak, Chignik in that area. But now, as things have evolved, I don't know if we can give credit to management, but we've had big seasons, huge seasons. 2013, 2015 in Southeast Alaska, big seasons in Kodiak, big seasons in Prince William Sound, fish hatcheries, all these things. Suddenly, there have been anyway more fish to catch, and strangely enough, every time I build a bigger boat, I would load it the first season and think, gee, wished I could have packed just a few more fish.
Okay, transition here. Let's talk about the next few boats you built and how they got bigger, and then how it evolved into when speed became an issue and why. And this boat, just for...
Yeah. Well, starting almost at the beginning of the 80s, 1980s, the price of fish, the competition for buying fish got huge, mostly from Japan, and herring and salmon, and there seemed to be an abundance of both herring and salmon. So when I first started fishing herring with my dad, we got $20 a ton for it, and all of a sudden in 1 year in Prince William Sound went from $20 a ton to $200 a ton, and by 2 years later it was $2,000 a ton. So there was almost like a military armament race of people trying to get into the herring fishery with anything they could, and the things that were most important were, number one, you had a good spotter pilot that could help you find the fish, and number two, you had a speedboat so you could get there first. Number three, you had the biggest possible net you could legally have. And and those were the kinds of things you had to do in order to be competitive if you wanted to win. That was.
And so your boats had gotten bigger, and you were doing fiberglass now instead of wood, and then you went for the speedboat at that time, which was aluminum and fiberglass. Tell us real quickly about this boat.
Well, I've always had a weakness for wanting to change the world or change the way things are done, and it's kind of a weakness because eventually you go broke by doing it because it's expensive. It's expensive to be an innovator.
Called the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so order of magnitude, I had a fellow working for me, a good friend to this day. In fact, I'm probably going to see him here in a few weeks. Anyway, he when I just tried to describe what I wanted to build, he said, "Wow." He says, "That's like an order of magnitude better." And I went, "Order of magnitude." I was needing a name for it.
So tell me, why was it different?
Well, I found a jet. In the military, I'd been in Coast Guard aviation, and they sent me to schools with jet engines, C-130 engines, and everything. And I knew the engines really well. And I went, "Well, why don't I just put a jet engine in a boat, and really and I'll be fast." And eventually that's what I did. It took 2 years to build the order of magnitude. By the time I got it done, the 80s were over, and there was a catastrophic failure. The markets disappeared.
You had a little bit of time, but not for very long.
I think I got one season in when it was still a lucrative deal. But at any rate, that was part of the evolution of bigger and better.
Okay, another minute about the order of magnitude here. So if I understand it correctly, back then the way they managed the fishery is when I was a kid. I was fishing with you by now.
Sure.
I was your skiff
Yep.
man, I think. Fishing game would open a huge area. Your spotter pilots would go around and find the big school of herring, and all the boats would rush there as fast as they could, and whoever got there first caught all the fish. So this was a really fast boat. So you caught them all, but it didn't last very long. And tell us a little bit about this boat, why it was unique, and then how you did for 1 year when the price was $2,000 a ton.
Yeah, well, this has a jet engine in it. It had a TF40, Textron Lycoming, an engine used in Chinook helicopters or similar. It was an industrial engine. It didn't have the magnesium. It was aluminum castings. 4,000 horsepower. I had to build a water jet to go with it. Wound up getting a water jet format a design that had been with jacuzzi, and that jet became the heart of this speedboat thing. And the boat did about 50 miles an hour when it was light and going full speed. But the market, about the time I got it done, the market collapsed. The Japanese decided to quit buying herring rower. They realized they were going to get it anyway. Why pay so much money for it? We're never sure quite what caused that. But
and at the same time, fuel prices went up, right? And this
well,
burned
yeah,
249 gallons an hour.
238 gallons an hour is what I burned, but it was cool, and I could really get to the fish first. When I'd go by, people would stop fishing and they'd watch. And I asked one guy, I said, "Well, how come you stopped doing what you're doing?" Even the spotter pilots had quit doing what they're doing. When I took off and headed somewhere, everybody just stood back and watched. And they said, "Well, because we were pretty sure it was going to blow up, and we wanted to be the one that saw it happen."
And most of this boat was fuel tank, not fish hole, because you get there, you get your net around it, and a tender would pump it all directly to the tender.
It didn't matter that you didn't have to pack a whole lot. You just had to get to them first and get your net around them and kill them, and then they were yours.
So eventually, though, the fuel prices went up. They regulated differently, and the price of herring went down. And so this boat had the turbine got taken out and got a normal diesel.
Now in Italia, my good buddy Bruce has got it, and it doesn't look like the order mag. But if you dig around inside of it, you would still find the insides look. It would still say the name order of magnitude.
Nice. Okay, so we've got the speed's over. Now we've got the boats today, and these are the last couple boats you built in the last 10 years or so. So how's the industry now?
Well, we're not worried about sissy lids or flying bridges or any of those kinds of things, and now we've come to full maturity on 58 feet. So we're 58 feet. We're pretty big boats, and we want to pack 200,000 pounds or more. Some of the Fred boats are 24 feet wide, 58 feet long, as big as you can make it get, and still be able to fit in a travel lift to get hauled out. I'm still an enthusiast of shallow draft, wide, hard chine boats, shallow draft twin screw. So these are a couple of the last two. I built, but the one on the left is probably the last boat I'll ever build because I'm tired of building boats and my knees aren't going to hold up much longer doing that. But but now the only thing that seems to make sense is to be able to pack a lot of fish. Not going to get into big seasons every year, but when you do, you can really make it pay. And we were in 2015, I think it was 13 or 15. We were loading the Leahona, the one on the right. We were loading it every opening. And so your poundage builds up. But we've had some big seasons. We hope they're going to continue. And also these boats can be used really easily as tenders. So you can pack fish in the rivers in Bristol Bay, which is what I'm doing now. And so I've come full circle. And maybe maybe the last segment. So now I don't really have a normal crew anymore. I've got my kids and my grandkids are my crew, and most people my age have already retired. But I'm having so darn much fun with the kids, the grandkids, and catching fish and not holding hook. I hate holding hook. I never want to hold hook again as long as I live. If I had to do that, I would have quit years ago. So now I built a jitney, and I built it for a test fishery in Norton Sound. We went up to Norton Sound, found out that Norton Sound didn't need a jitney, and besides they wouldn't let us fish anyway because of weird regulations with the locals and whatnot. So last year I just full circle went back to the big boat and towed a jitney around and catching fish in shallow water. Only this time now, you sure know it's legal. No more of this up the creek stuff. So I think got a magnet that holds it up there.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so last clip here. So we've got the Kimura up on the beach in Lynchak here, I think it is, and with the jitney behind it. But I thought let's take a minute and talk about some other interesting historical things that have changed. You mentioned fish handling, fish holds. I think it's interesting stuff.
Fish handling is interesting. When I was a kid, we had pews, which pew would look like a pitchfork with just one pokey thing, and we would jump down on the fish hold in our hip boots, and we would stab this pew. The first fish would be by the head, and then after that you just shove it in as far as it would go. So sometimes you get 4 fish on a pew at one time. Of course, they're stabbed right through the guts and every other place, and you have to throw them over the side of the boat into either a conveyor that runs up into the cannery or into another into a tender if you happen to have a tender alongside. So anyway, this was finally decided that it was not good practice for fishing, and it definitely was not. So that evolved into, now you had to jump down to the fish hold and pitch them into a brailer by hand. No more pews. Pews were outlawed. There's a few around as sort of mementos of the past, but anyway, then as time went by, we came up with a fish pump, and the first one I saw was in Kodiak was at King Crab's dock, and it was like a giant vacuum cleaner. You could hear it all over town. That thing would wind up, and it was like the world's biggest vacuum. I don't know what, 100-horse motor on it. I don't know what it had, and it would just literally vacuum the fish out of your hold. But the fish would go about 90 miles an hour through a pipe and around the corner and into a bin, and they were beating the fish up real bad. So that thing got outlawed. And then we wound up with the fish pumps, which is nothing more than like a wet dry vacuum cleaner. And you suck the vacuum cleaner full. Well, now you pressurize the vacuum cleaner and blow them out of discharge, and you pump fish that way. So that's how things changed. Also, what changed was the requirement for refrigeration. It's almost standard and accepted industry-wide now. Your fish have to be refrigerated. So fish quality has gotten better. There's more fresh fish on the market. There's prices are horrible still. That's the only thing that hasn't changed. Fish prices are still in the toilet, but we have done a lot better job making a good quality product.
Okay, that was fish handling. Let's take a few minutes to talk about fish holds. I thought that was interesting. What fish holds were like at the beginning and how they evolved, the different steps.
Well, yeah, fish holds at the beginning where you would jump down on the fish hold. It was wood. It was a wooden boat.
Did you say it went right up against the ribs?
Yeah, you'd look and see the ribs on either side, and a few planks in the bottom, and a shaft alley down the middle, and a place where you could get into it and grease your intermediate bearings, Babbitt bearings that we have in the middle. But Fish would get squashed in around the frames on the edge. There was nothing to even a hint of anything to get them cold. Then and people started building and these on the wooden boats and the glare boats. They started building a plywood fish hold and fiberglassing with white fiberglass, and that was interesting because most fish holds in the very bottom of the fish holds would have. It's weird to tell, but this is the way it was.
Yeah.
There'd be a Playboy centerfold in the bottom of the fish hold. It would be clear. I guess the incentive was to hurry up and get the fish unloaded so you could look at that picture.
Right.
I'm not sure what the deal was.
Right.
But anyway, that was the beginning of plywood fish holds. But the downside was that there was a moisture trapped in between the sides of the hull and the inner and the skin of the fish hold, and the boat started rotting out. The frames would rot out. It would get wet, moldy, and eventually the wood would rot. So there was no way to ventilate it. So that was an issue with the wooden boats. Steel boats, aluminum boats, which is pretty much the norm. Fiberglass boats are normal now. The rot's not a problem anymore. The fish holds usually have a good system for circulation and refrigeration, and the fish look better now. And technically, when you braille them out of the or roll them, we don't braille them anymore. You roll them out of the net into the fish hole. They land in water, so they don't get the big red marks and the bruises and everything. So our fish is great. I just, the big hope would be that the price would match, that the quality has gone up.
Got it.
But there is competition with farm salmon still, and there is competition from fish from Russia. And so it's a world thing, and so we get what we can get. Hopefully it'll get better.
Okay, so this is the last segment. We'll finish up talking with Ray Wadsworth about the kind of the history and evolution that he saw during his lifetime with Alaska seining. But I wanted to have him talk about for a minute what it was like when he was a kid, before there was power blocks and rings, and how purse seining worked, and how you did it when you were a kid.
Well, yeah, we did. It was called hand pursing or siwash seining, I guess. That was what I remember as a kid anyway, we called it. But we would just purse by hand. We would pull on the lead line, take two of us on the side of the rail and pull our guts out to pull the lead line up and stack it in two little piles, a pile on the left and a pile on the right. And we sat on the right starboard side of the boat all the time, so the power block is the stern of the boat's to my right here. And we would make a little pile of leads, and then the pile on the right, we'd flip it upside down so they'd come off the top to go in there. And that was how we pursed. And then I remember when...
So there were no rings, no purse line?
No purse line at all. I remember when Dad, we first heard it was probably me that egged Dad into trying it. Let's do it. Let's try a purse line. I hear guys are doing these purse lines. So we got some rings and purse lines and straps. And the first time we made a set, we only did about, 30 fathoms on net or something like that with this purse in it. The purse line got behind the web, and the whole thing came as a big giant wad. Made about 3 sets. Dad said, "I'm done with this," and we got out his knife and he cut the whole mess off. and for a few, and I kept hounding him, "But Dad, I know there's a way to do it because other guys are doing it." So pretty soon, Dad sews all the rings back on, the ring straps on. We try it again. We finally figured it out, but that was the evolution of the net.
Talk about the net. You had cotton nets,
and
you had to do something every year to them?
My dad was the first one the last one to use. I mean, he was the last guy to have actual corks that floats. Everybody else went to these brown Sponge X foam corks.
But you also had cotton
Dad didn't
web.
want to get rid of those. But the power block would break those things in half.
Oh,
And our net was cotton. I remember when nylon first came out, and Dad hated it at first because it was tangled up real easy.
Didn't you have to treat the cotton?
Yeah, then we had to treat the cotton every year
with
copper sulfate in a great big tank of bluestone, they called it, and we'd have to rinse it and get all the bacteria out. Otherwise, next year it'd be a big rotten mess. So anyway,
and didn't you paddle when you were seining as a kid? So the skiff didn't have an outboard.
When we first started, actually, it was Dad would holler, "Set your oars." And actually, before that, we had what we called a jalopy, which looked like a little feed trough to me, it looked like it was about 4 feet long, but I think it was only about 2 feet long. And it was tied to the end of the net. You'd throw the net off, throw that thing off the stern, and then goose the engine, and the prop wash would start to suck the net over the side, and that's how you'd lay out the net. And then we evolved to skiffs, and then skiffs with oars, and then from oars to outboards. Anyway, that's progress.
I hope you all enjoyed.
Yeah.
Thank you.